දැන් මාස 25ක ස්ථාවර තැන්පතු සඳහා 10.75ක අසම සම පොලියක් LB යසෙසුරු.
Tonight, on First at 9 this Tuesday, the 3rd of March 2026. Rising inferno, tensions surge across the Middle East as Israel announces the destruction of the Iranian regime's leadership compound. US President Trump predicts a prolonged war with Iran. Iran declares the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical maritime corridor for oil shipments. Domino effect. Closure of the Strait of Hormuz sparks mounting concerns over a sharp rise in global oil prices. Economists warn of potential food inflation worldwide. Sri Lanka's balance of payments may face significant strain should the closure persist. Supply secured. President Anura Desanayake assures no fuel shortage in the country. Confirms availability of sufficient fuel reserves as distribution continues uninterrupted. Markets reel. Global financial markets tumble as Middle East conflict intensifies. Colombo Stock Exchange records the largest single-day point decline in history.
Kalin baby soap rupial 90කට. Kalin baby podi හැමෝටමයි.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9 on Derana News Channel, Sri Lanka's most trusted news source. I'm Tatyara Naike, joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. We begin with your top story. The conflict between the United States, Israel and Iran is intensifying, with leaders on all sides signaling that military operations could continue for an extended period. US President Donald Trump stated that the mission against Iran may last longer than initially anticipated, emphasizing that Washington's objectives remain unchanged. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced plans to close the Strait of Hormuz, the world's primary oil transportation route.
The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in a targeted strike by the United States and Israel last Saturday. Reports also claim that several members of his family died in the same attack. Iran continues to face intense attacks, with many strikes targeting the capital, Tehran. A hospital in Tehran was damaged during one of the attacks. According to the Iranian Red Crescent, the overall death toll from the recent strikes is approaching 800. Among those reported killed are 176 children who died in an attack on a girls' high school. The victims' funeral rites were performed earlier today, drawing large crowds. Significant infrastructure damage has also been reported. Iranian authorities state that a hospital in Tehran was struck and damage was sustained at the historic Golestan Palace, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The full extent of the damage remains unclear. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces say they have dismantled the Iranian regime's leadership compound, the central headquarters. The conflict is now expanding beyond Iran's borders. Missiles and drone attacks have been reported across parts of the Gulf region, including areas near diplomatic missions. The US Embassy in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, was reportedly a major target of these attacks. The US State Department advises American citizens in 14 Middle Eastern countries to leave immediately. These countries include Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, the United Arab Emirates and Yemen. Several US embassies in the region have temporarily suspended operations. In this context, US President Donald Trump indicated yesterday that the Iran-Israel-US conflict could escalate into a prolonged war.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capability. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it.
US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth issued a strongly worded warning stating that any threats against American citizens would be met with decisive action.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change. The mission of Operation Epic Fury is laser-focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both. If you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you.
In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on the Iranian public to pursue political change as Israeli forces continued operations both inside Iran and along the northern border.
Now, of course, it's up to the people of Iran in the final count to change the government. But we are creating, America and Israel together are creating the conditions for them to do so. And I think peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia would be really possible. I said it could be quick and decisive. It may take some time, but it's not going to take years. It's not an endless war. In fact, it's an effort right now to achieve the peace that we all yearn and pray for.
Lebanese militant group Hezbollah also launched retaliatory strikes, prompting further Israeli air operations targeting sites in Beirut and the southern city of Tyre. Hours after the Israeli response, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam declared a ban on Hezbollah's military and security activities. Meanwhile, the Israeli military, citing border security concerns, announced the deployment of additional infantry units to southern Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Force said the move aims to ensure the safety of residents living along the border. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi defended Tehran's actions, stating that Iran reserves the right under international law to respond to attacks on its sovereignty. The widening conflict is also affecting global markets. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced plans to close the strategic Strait of Hormuz, warning that vessels attempting to pass through could face military action. The strait connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and carries nearly 20% of global oil and gas shipments, supplying approximately 70% of the oil and gas needs of major economies including China, India, Japan and South Korea. In another related development, Qatar has reportedly suspended part of its liquefied natural gas production due to regional security concerns. Qatar is one of the world's largest LNG exporters, and the Gulf region accounts for roughly 1/5 of global LNG supply. Gas prices in parts of Europe and Asia have already recorded sharp increases in the wake of the announcement. In this context, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the US will implement a plan to mitigate increasing energy prices starting today.
We have a program in place that will begin to be implemented by Secretary Wright, Secretary Bessent. We talked about it last night, again about this program. We talked this morning, and starting tomorrow you will see us rolling out those phases to try to mitigate against that. Obviously markets are going to be reacting to news about what's happening. And again, a reminder, think about it, okay? This terroristic regime led by radical clerics has the ability potentially to shut off 20% of global energy. That's the kind of leverage they have because of their Navy. We're going to destroy their Navy. But there is a plan in place. We anticipated this could be an issue, and Secretary Wright and Bessent will begin to roll out those steps starting tomorrow to mitigate against the impact that could have.
Meanwhile, major UAE airlines suspended flights in light of ongoing tensions in the Middle East. However, foreign media reports that limited flight operations have resumed as hundreds of thousands of passengers remain stranded. Accordingly, the first Air India flight from Dubai successfully touched down in New Delhi today with 149 passengers and 8 crew on board. It was also reported that a Italy-bound special flight service carrying 127 passengers from Oman also successfully touched down earlier today. A group of 29 leading airlines, hotel and travel companies from Europe, Asia and North America shed a combined $22.6 billion in market value yesterday in the wake of ongoing tensions in the Middle East. Meanwhile, foreign media published satellite images of the aftermath of the first US-Israeli airstrike targeting Iranian nuclear facility Natanz. Entrances to the underground uranium enrichment plant have been struck. As the United States and Israel pursue attacks, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was quoted saying that Moscow is yet to see evidence suggesting Iran was developing nuclear weapons. The joint US-Israeli strikes have triggered retaliatory strikes across the Middle East. Strikes have targeted urban centers, energy infrastructure, airports and hotels. According to the Kuwait news agency, the Middle Eastern country intercepted 178 ballistic missiles and 384 drones since the commencement of airstrikes. The Defense Ministry of the United Arab Emirates meanwhile confirmed its forces intercepted 169 out of 182 detected ballistic missiles. UAE Defense Forces also intercepted 645 drones, with an additional 44 impacting within state territory. Meanwhile, the General Command of the Bahrain Defense Force confirmed Bahrain intercepted 70 missiles and 76 drones. State-run Qatar news agency noted that the country successfully intercepted 101 of 104 detected missiles. 24 out of 39 drones and 2 Iranian Su-24 bomber aircraft were also shot down. In a separate development, Pakistan conducted airstrikes on the former US Bagram airbase north of Kabul over the weekend. Despite Afghan claims that their defenses repelled the attacks with minimal impact, satellite imagery confirms significant damage, including a destroyed aircraft hangar and multiple flattened warehouses. Intense ground clashes, shelling and exchanges of fire persist at more than 24 locations across provinces such as Kandahar, Khost, Nangarhar, Paktika, Kuna and Zabul. Afghanistan's Taliban-led forces claim to have captured several Pakistani military posts, with reports varying and some citing dozens. However, Pakistan strongly disputes any territorial losses, asserting instead that its forces destroyed Afghan positions, ammunition depots and other targets. The civilian toll is severe, with the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan reporting at least 42 civilians killed and 104 wounded from February 26 to March 2nd due to indirect fire and airstrikes. The preliminary figures include women and children, with thousands displaced and the humanitarian crisis worsening. The UNAMA urgently called for an immediate halt to the fighting. Pakistan describes the situation as an open war targeting Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan militants operating from bases inside Afghanistan and warns of potential further strikes. Afghanistan denies allowing its territory to be used against Pakistan and vows to defend its sovereignty. Casualty figures remain highly disputed and unverified independently.
Central Finance Youth Aduwatawa.
As tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East, economists warn of a substantial strain on Sri Lanka's balance of payments if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for a considerable period of time. Adding to the concerns, Deputy Minister of Tourism Professor Ruwan Singha disclosed that Sri Lanka's tourism sector could lose between 10 and 12 million US within a single week this month.
The Sri Lankan embassy in Israel yesterday confirmed that a Sri Lankan national employed as a caregiver in Israel sustained minor injuries during an Iranian missile strike last night. Sri Lankan ambassador to Israel, Nimal Bandara, stated that the injured Sri Lankan is presently receiving medical treatment, while embassy officials remain in close contact to monitor her recovery. Speaking to Ada Derana, the ambassador emphasized that an evacuation is not deemed necessary at this time. However, he assured that contingency measures are fully prepared should circumstances warrant such action. He further noted that although hostilities have intensified in certain regions, Israel Defense Forces are actively managing the situation. In a separate development, the Israeli government granted an automatic 90-day extension on foreign visas, a measure that extends relief to Sri Lankan workers currently residing in Israel. Similarly, Kuwait's Ministry of Interior announced a 1-month automatic extension for all expired or soon-to-expire entry visas, effective from February 28th with no associated fees. Meanwhile, Sri Lankan embassy in Lebanon reports that it is vigilantly overseeing the welfare of over 7,500 Sri Lankan nationals residing in the country amid intensified Israeli operations targeting Hezbollah positions. Officials indicate that one of the Sri Lankan community in Beirut, 22 individuals are residing in areas classified as high risk. 4 have already been safely relocated, while coordinated efforts are underway to move the remaining 18 to secure locations. Meanwhile, Sri Lankan ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, Arusha Kure, urged members of the Sri Lankan community to contact emergency hotlines should assistance be required.
The Ministry of Defence announced that the UAE's air defence successfully intercepted today 9 ballistic missiles, 6 cruise missiles, and 148 drones. The Ministry of Defence further affirmed its full readiness to address all threats in order to ensure the protection of the nation's territory and safety of all citizens and residents. If our Sri Lankan residents have any queries, the embassy has a 24/7 hotline. Please contact us on +971 50 931 8538.
In response to evolving regional developments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Employment and Tourism established a dedicated emergency response unit to coordinate efforts concerning the Middle East situation. Owing to the temporary closure of airspace across several Middle Eastern countries, flights between Bandaranaike International Airport and destinations in the region have been suspended. Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority, Daminda Rambukwalla, confirmed that 171 flights to and from Katunayake have been cancelled since hostilities began last Saturday. Highlighting that conflict's economic impact in Sri Lanka, Deputy Minister of Tourism Ruwan Ranasinghe cautioned that the tourism sector could incur losses between 10 to 12 million US dollars within a single week in March.
There is a challenge for us to bring down our tourism traffic, particularly from the Europe. So since they have closed down temporarily the airspace, the tourist traffic remain very low from these air routes. We as the government and the Tourism Development Authority are acting and taking measures to handle these situations. And also we have activated our 24-hour hotline, that is 1912, to assist particularly for tourists at difficult situations. We are looking for different options in the long run if things are going to continue for us to accommodate some of such visitors until they find their way back to their countries.
Meanwhile, economist Talal Rafi commented on the impact on Sri Lanka due to ongoing tensions in the Middle East.
At the moment, we are seeing much higher oil prices, so that is definitely going to rise. The other factor that is not usually considered is it could lead to food inflation globally, because about 1/3 of urea, methanol, nitrogen fertilizer, they also pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So this can drive up food prices globally, resulting in global inflation going up. Saudi and UAE refineries have been attacked. So this brings another development about oil production in the coming weeks and months as well. But for Sri Lanka, it's definitely going to have an effect. So higher oil prices will have an effect because oil imports account for $4.5 billion a year. Even a 10% hike will have an effect on our current account. So if the Strait of Hormuz is closed for a long period and if oil prices hit over $100, it will definitely have a major impact on our balance of payments. With that, I mean, the impact's also going to be on other fronts. I mean, Sri Lanka, though we have a large trade deficit, the reason why we balance our current account is because of tourism and remittances. So around $8 billion of remittances come to Sri Lanka annually, and half of that comes from the Middle East. So the longer this crisis goes on, we could see reduction in that as well. Overall, I think the impact is going to be huge, but at the same time, to reiterate, it heavily depends on how long this war lasts.
දිවයිනේ ප්‍රථමයෙන් අටක් දායද කළ සන්නාමය බණ්ඩාර තිසානායක ඉකොන් BS මුළු දිවයිනටම ඔන්ලයින්.
Welcome back to First at 9. Now, President Honorable Dissanayake addressed Parliament this morning, outlining the economic and geopolitical challenges Sri Lanka is confronting amid the heightening conflict in the Middle East. During his address, the President reassured the nation that there is no fuel shortage in the country, emphasizing that adequate supplies are available and distribution continues without disruption.
ඕනෑම යුද ගැටුමක් කිසිදු ජන කණ්ඩායමකට හිතකර තත්ත්වයක් නිර්මාණය කරන්නේ නැහැ.
War does not create a healthy environment for any people group. Therefore, the Sri Lankan government's position is that global conflicts must be resolved swiftly in order to achieve lasting peace for all parties involved. It is true that the people of our country are experiencing a certain level of anxiety. There is no purpose in blaming them for this reaction. Unpleasant memories from the not-so-distant past still linger in the hearts of our people. More than just an unpleasant chapter, it was a tragedy that the country endured only 2 to 3 years ago. As a result, our society is understandably sensitive and can become alarmed even by small developments. We fully understand this sentiment. As a government, we have been closely monitoring all recent developments. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka has reviewed the current situation and will submit a comprehensive report to me this evening or tomorrow morning, outlining the potential impact on the country. This will give us a clearer understanding of the possible effects on the monetary sector. In addition, the Ministry of Finance is assessing how the present situation may affect the day-to-day lives of our people. We are also preparing an analysis based on a worst-case scenario. Furthermore, the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are working together to develop a plan to address any challenges that expatriate Sri Lankans may face. As a government, we take full responsibility for ensuring that Sri Lankans, particularly those engaged in essential services, are protected and supported. Let me address the potential issues one by one. One key concern is fuel. According to the reports I have received, fuel queues have gradually reduced over time. I believe that if we continue to reassure the public, these queues will continue to diminish. The primary challenge we face relates to storage capacity. We currently do not have the capacity to store fuel for 2 to 3 months. Therefore, our system operates in a way where as the next shipment arrives in the country, existing stocks must be in the process of being emptied. We cannot maintain full storage capacity at all times. If we set aside the IOC terminal in Trincomalee, the combined storage capacity of the Kolonava and Muthurajawala terminals is only 150,000 metric tons. Current stocks amount to approximately 103,000 metric tons. In addition, our daily refinery production amounts to 1,800 metric tons. Therefore, we must also allocate storage space for the output produced by the refinery. Considering these limitations, I believe we have been operating under a sound and practical storage plan based on the capacity available to us. Accordingly, we currently have sufficient diesel stocks for 33 days. With regard to petrol, our total storage capacity is 161,087 metric tons, and at the time this crisis began, 136,270 metric tons were available. Based on current consumption levels, this quantity is sufficient for 27 days. Furthermore, we are scheduled to receive a 35,000 metric ton petrol shipment on the 7th or 8th of March. Taking all these factors into account, I believe we have adequate petrol stocks for approximately 40 days. In terms of jet fuel, the daily requirement is about 1,800 metric tons. Considering both local production and imports, we have sufficient jet fuel stocks for 49 days, assuming no additional shipments are received. However, we currently have several shipments scheduled. A shipment from RM Parks is expected on the 14th, from Sinopec on the 17th, from IOC on the 21st, and from the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation on the 28th. All of these shipments have been loaded and we have confirmation regarding their dispatch and supply. Moreover, crude oil is essential for refinery operations. The crude oil currently available is sufficient for 26 days. In addition, another shipment sufficient for 18 days is already on its way to Sri Lanka. Therefore, even if no further shipments arrive, our refinery can continue operations for 44 days. Given the arrangements already in place, the scheduled shipments will arrive accordingly and there should be no fuel shortage under the present circumstances. However, if the war escalates, all of us will inevitably have to face consequences. If refineries were to shut down globally, there would be little we could do to prevent the impact. Realistically, as long as the situation remains at its current level, we have clear plans and solutions in place. It is not within our control to determine whether this issue escalates. Our responsibility as a government is to monitor developments closely and make the necessary adjustments in response to how the situation evolves. Sri Lanka's total refinery capacity remained at 50,000 metric tons for 47 years since 1979. What were those governments doing? We have called for expressions of interest to increase the capacity from 50,000 to 100,000 metric tons. The next major issue is gas. The daily demand for literal gas is between 1,000 and 1,200 metric tons, yet our storage capacity is only 8,000 metric tons, which is only sufficient for a week. As a result, shipments are arriving in the country every 2 days. This situation must be changed. Recently, due to disruptions to the private company's supply, daily demand for literal gas increased to 1,800 metric tons. The problem is clear. Currently, we cannot even store gas sufficient for 5 days. The state gas supplier's storage capacity must be expanded. Meanwhile, a private company owns a 30,000 metric ton storage terminal, but this facility was built for the export market. In this emergency, we held discussions with the company and requested requested temporary access to 15,000 metric tons of storage for the local market. I am grateful that they agreed. However, since the terminals were constructed under the BOI, if gas is supplied to the local market, the required taxes must be paid. This company is only allowed to supply 20% of its export volume to the local market. However, when the export market collapsed, supply to the local market also stalled. That is why I decided to once again declare a state of emergency. Through special regulations, we can temporarily authorize the supply of gas to the local market with all taxes properly accounted for. There is no fraud involved. Additionally, a shipment of 100,000 units of litre gas is scheduled to arrive in the country on the 12th. With these measures in place, I believe the risk of a serious crisis in the fuel and gas sector is limited. Next is the safety of Sri Lankans working abroad. Approximately 1 million Sri Lankans registered with the Bureau of Foreign Employment are working in countries affected by the war. We must ensure their safety in the event of an emergency. Accordingly, we have developed a plan with their protection in mind. Looking ahead, we must also consider potential future challenges. The export sector may be affected in two ways. First, directly due to the impact of war in the affected region, and second, due to the broader effects of a global economic downturn. We are carefully monitoring these risks as well. We hope for the best but are preparing for the worst.
Parliament today, Samaga Jana Balawege parliamentarian Mujibur Rahman criticized the government's failure to condemn the killing of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in US and Israeli strikes. Meanwhile, opposition leader Sajid Premadasa called on the government to reveal details of its plans to address the conflict's effect on Sri Lanka.
I raised a question regarding the substandard call issue, but I was not given the opportunity to ask it as initially submitted and was asked to amend the question. For example, I wanted to ask what alternatives the government plans to implement for the energy loss caused by the Noracholi power plant's inability to produce 900 megawatts. I was prohibited from asking this question. I was also prohibited from asking whether there will be any emergency coal purchases. On February 20th, we debated this call issue for an entire day and addressed all submitted questions. There was only one question that was not answered. It involved a People's Bank account in Homagama. MP Marikar was asked to provide the name and account number, which we have not yet received. That does not concern me. What matters is the question I ask. I would like to remind you that as a government, you should be able to make plans to address ever-changing global dynamics more comprehensively and effectively than this. We do not need the President to announce how much fuel stocks we have or how many fuel shipments are arriving. That is the Minister's responsibility. The President should focus on more complex issues such as ongoing global conflicts. It reflects their ineffectiveness. The President does not trust his ministers and is left helpless. Why is the government unable to condemn the killing of the Supreme Leader of Iran? Minister Dr. Nalin Jadis stated in a media briefing that condolences were offered to Iran. The Supreme Leader did not die of natural causes. He was killed by bombs from the USA and Israel. We are not a government that acknowledges the takeover of a sovereign country by another. As a government and a nation, we operate from the standpoint that the fundamental rights of all citizens worldwide must be protected. The opposition does not need to instruct the government on what to say. The government will make its own statements and will not wait for the opposition to guide it. Sri Lanka now has a significant opportunity to attract investments. For at least the next 2 to 3 years, investors may be hesitant to engage in Middle Eastern countries. However, even though we have communicated with the Board of Investment and Port City authorities, they currently lack the capacity to market this opportunity effectively. We need to offer tax holidays and investment incentives to encourage investors. Otherwise, companies from other countries will not invest in Sri Lanka despite their goodwill towards the nation. In the past, people in queues blame the government. This time the situation is different. People are questioning why they are in the queues. Some media outlets are exaggerating the situation. However, the public has acted responsibly, understanding that there is no need to panic. Trust in the government has helped resolve the issue effectively.
Now taking you to business news, the Colombo Stock Exchange suffered its largest single-day loss in points today. The benchmark SPI lost 5.44% to close at 22,443.38, while the more liquid S&P Sri Lanka 20 decreased by 4.86% to end the day at 6,313.65. Market turnover was 9.56 billion rupees. Foreign participation in market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreigners closing as net sellers, offloading shares worth 59 million rupees. Global financial markets plunged for the second day today amid the intensifying regional conflict in the Middle East. Oil prices surged sharply with global benchmark Brent crude climbing over 8% to $84 per barrel after the closure of key shipping route, the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, US stocks are trading sharply lower with the S&P 500 falling 1.4%, the Dow about 1.5% and the Nasdaq 2%. In the Asia-Pacific, South Korea's Kospi plunged by 7.2%, Japan's Nikkei 225 by 3% and Australia's ASX 200 by 1.5%. By midday, the pan-European stock 600 was 3.2% lower, extending yesterday's steep losses that saw the index close 1.6% lower. Germany's DAX has fallen about 3.8%. The UK's FTSE 100 is off by 2.7%, while France's CAC 40 shed about 3%. That's all for tonight from First at 9. Thank you for joining. Have a great night.